The dare was supposed to be harmless, a stupid game fueled by tequila and laughter. But when Sandra's lips met his, the bar went silent. His hand shot to her waist, pulling her closer with a grip that promised danger and devotion in equal measure. Dark eyes burned into hers, and in that moment, she saw it. The flicker of something lethal awakening inside him. She didn't know his name. Didn't know he was Kang Min-ho, the man even criminals feared. She only knew she'd just kissed the devil, and he had no intention of letting her walk away. Welcome to Afrokorean Central, besties. Please like, share, and subscribe. Sandra stumbled backward, heart hammering against her ribs. The entire bar seemed to hold its breath. Min-ho's fingers loosened slowly, reluctantly, as if every instinct in his body screamed to pull her back. His expression remained unreadable, but his jaw tightened with barely controlled restraint. Her friends erupted in cheers behind her, oblivious to the shift in the air. They thought she'd completed the dare. They thought it was over. But Sandra could feel the weight of his stare following her as she returned to their table, could sense something fundamental had changed in the space between one heartbeat and the next. Min-ho watched her disappear into the crowd, his whiskey forgotten. For 15 years, he built an empire on ice and calculation. Nothing touched him. Nothing moved him. Until 30 seconds ago when a stranger's lips had brushed his and cracked something open inside his chest that he'd thought was sealed shut forever. His second-in-command, Yoon Tae-jin, appeared at his elbow. "Boss, do you want me to find out who she is?" Min-ho's response was immediate. "Everything. I want to know everything about her before sunrise." The next morning, Sandra woke with a pounding headache and fragments of memory that made her stomach flip. She remembered her best friend Keisha daring her to kiss the most intimidating man in the bar. Remembered the heat of his hand on her waist. Remembered eyes so dark they looked black in the dim lighting, studying her like she was a puzzle he intended to solve. She groaned into her pillow. Of all the stupid things she'd done since moving to Seoul 6 months ago, this topped the list. At least she'd never see him again. The city was huge, and the chances of crossing paths with a stranger from a random bar were essentially zero. Sandra pulled herself together and headed to her job at the art gallery in Gangnam. She loved the work, even if the pay barely covered her tiny apartment. Curating exhibitions gave her purpose, and the quiet elegance of the space soothed something in her soul that had been restless since childhood. She was arranging a new installation when her boss appeared, looking flustered. "Sandra, we have a situation. Our primary investor is here for an unscheduled visit. I need you to give him a private tour of the new collection. Show him everything, and for the love of God, be charming." Sandra smoothed her dress and grabbed her tablet. She could do charming. She'd been doing charming her entire life, navigating spaces where she was often the only black woman in the room. She'd learned to make herself simultaneously visible and invisible, valuable but non-threatening. The investor stood with his back to her, studying a massive canvas. Something about his posture made her pulse quicken. When he turned around, Sandra's breath caught in her throat. Kang Min-ho looked even more devastating in daylight. His tailored suit probably cost more than she made in 6 months. Power radiated from him like heat, and when those obsidian eyes locked onto hers, she saw recognition flash across his face, followed by something that looked almost like satisfaction. "You," he said simply, his voice a low rumble that did dangerous things to her equilibrium. Sandra's professionalism kicked in despite her racing heart. "Mr. Kang, welcome to the gallery. I understand you'd like a tour of our new collection." She kept her voice steady, cool, giving nothing away. Min-ho's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "I would like that very much." He moved closer, and Sandra caught the scent of expensive cologne and something darker, more primal. "But first, I believe you owe me an apology." Her spine straightened. "I don't owe you anything. It was a dare. You kissed me without permission." His voice dropped lower, intimate despite the formal words. "In my world, that has consequences." Sandra lifted her chin, refusing to be intimidated. "Then perhaps you should stay out of public bars if you can't handle drunk strangers. Now, shall we discuss the art, Or would you prefer to continue this fascinating conversation about consent while standing in the middle of my workplace? For a long moment, they stared at each other. Then Min-ho laughed, a genuine sound of surprised delight. You're not afraid of me. Should I be? Most people are. He studied her with open curiosity. You're either very brave or very foolish. I haven't decided which yet. The tour lasted an hour. Sandra explained each piece with passion and expertise, and Min-ho listened with an attention that felt more intense than the art deserved. She could feel him watching her, analyzing her, as if she were the real exhibition. When they reached the final installation, Min-ho stepped close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. Have dinner with me tonight. Sandra's heart stuttered, but she kept her expression neutral. I don't date clients. I'm not asking as a client. His hand lifted, fingers ghosting along her jawline without quite touching. I'm asking as the man you kissed last night. The man who hasn't stopped thinking about you for 12 hours straight. The admission should have been creepy. Instead, it sent electricity racing down her spine. That was a mistake. I was drunk. Were you? His eyes searched hers. Because I was completely sober, and I felt it too. Whatever that was between us. Sandra took a deliberate step backward, needing distance to think clearly. Mr. Kang, I appreciate the offer, but I don't think it's a good idea. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to finish. She walked away before he could respond, before her treacherous body could overrule her sensible brain. She didn't look back, but she could feel his gaze burning into her shoulders until she disappeared into the back office. Min-ho remained in the gallery for another 20 minutes, purchasing 3 pieces at prices that made Sandra's boss nearly weep with gratitude. Before leaving, he left his business card on Sandra's desk with a single sentence written on the back in elegant script. I'm a patient man, but I always get what I want. That evening, Sandra met Keisha at their favorite coffee shop. Her friend took one look at her face and grinned. Okay, spill. What happened? You have that look. Remember the guy from the bar? The one you dared me to kiss? The scary hot one? Keisha's eyes went wide. Please tell me you didn't see him again. He's our gallery's primary investor. He showed up for a private tour this morning. Sandra dropped her head into her hands. And he asked me out. Keisha let out a low whistle. Girl, that's either the best or worst luck I've ever heard. What did you say? I said no, obviously. Sandra looked up. There's something about him, Keisha. He's intense in a way that feels dangerous. Like he could consume me whole and not even notice. Her friend's expression turned serious. Do you want my advice, or do you want me to tell you what you want to hear? Advice. Run, Keisha said bluntly. Men like that don't do casual. They don't do normal. If you let him in, he'll take over everything, and when it ends, because it always ends, you'll be devastated. So, unless you're prepared for that kind of fire, stay far away. Sandra nodded slowly. She knew Keisha was right. The smart move was to keep her distance, to treat Min-ho with professional courtesy and nothing more. She'd worked too hard to build her life in Seoul to risk it on a man who looked at her like she was his next conquest. But that night, lying in her small apartment, Sandra couldn't stop thinking about the way his voice had dropped when he asked her to dinner. Couldn't stop remembering the barely controlled restraint in his posture, as if he were constantly holding himself back from reaching for her. The next day, flowers arrived at the gallery. Not a dozen roses, but a stunning arrangement of rare orchids in deep purple and cream, so extravagant that her co-workers gathered around to stare. The card read simply, Patience. MK. Sandra threw the card in the trash, but she couldn't bring herself to discard the flowers. They sat on the corner of her desk, beautiful and unsettling, a constant reminder of the man who decided she was worth pursuing. More gifts followed over the next week. A first-edition book by her favorite author. Tickets to a sold-out concert she'd mentioned wanting to attend. A donation to the children's art program she volunteered with, large enough to fund supplies for an entire year. Each gift came with a card bearing a single word, patience, or soon, or waiting. Never anything that crossed the line into harassment, but enough to make it clear that Min-ho hadn't forgotten about her, hadn't lost interest, wasn't giving up. Sandra tried to focus on work, tried to ignore the flutter in her stomach every time a delivery arrived. But resistance was becoming harder when every gift showed how carefully he'd been listening during their brief tour, how much attention he'd paid to the things that mattered to her. On Friday evening, Sandra stayed late to finalize the installation for their upcoming exhibition. The gallery was quiet, most of the staff already gone home. She was adjusting the lighting on a particularly challenging piece when she sensed a presence behind her. She turned to find Min-ho leaning against the doorframe, watching her with that intense focus that made her feel like the only person in the world. "You're trespassing," she said, proud that her voice remained steady. "We're closed. Your boss gave me a key." He pushed off the frame and walked toward her with predatory grace. "Said I could come see the art whenever inspiration struck." "That's a terrible security policy." "I agree." He stopped close enough that she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. Anyone could walk in. Anyone could get too close to something valuable. The double meaning wasn't lost on her. "Mr. Kang, what are you doing here?" Min-ho's hand lifted, and this time he did touch her, his fingers trailing along her jaw with devastating gentleness. "I'm here because I can't stay away. Because I've tried giving you space, tried being patient, but every day that passes without hearing your voice feels like suffocation." His confession stole the air from her lungs. "You don't know me." "We spent an hour together." "I know enough." He leaned closer, his breath ghosting across her lips. "I know you're passionate about art because you see beauty where others see paint and canvas. I know you volunteer with children because you believe creativity can heal. I know you're strong enough to face a man like me without flinching. And I know that when I kissed you back in that bar, something inside me recognized something inside you." Sandra's heart hammered against her ribs. "This is crazy. You're my gallery's investor. This is wildly inappropriate. Then I'll withdraw my investment." His thumb brushed across her lower lip. "I'll walk away from the gallery entirely if that's what it takes to remove the obstacle. But I won't walk away from you." The intensity in his voice should have frightened her. Instead, it ignited something reckless and hungry that she'd been trying to suppress for days. "Why me?" she whispered. "You could have anyone." Min-ho's other hand came up to frame her face, his touch reverent despite the heat in his gaze. "Because when you kissed me, I felt human for the first time in 15 years. Because you look at me like I'm just a man, not a monster. Because I've built an empire on being untouchable, and all I want is for you to touch me again." The admission broke something in her. Sandra surged up on her toes and kissed him, pouring weeks of suppressed attraction into the contact. Min-ho groaned against her mouth and pulled her flesh against his body, one hand tangling in her natural curls while the other splayed possessively across her lower back. This kiss was nothing like the first one. That had been quick, unexpected, almost innocent. This was fire and need, and barely controlled hunger. Min-ho kissed her like he was trying to memorize the taste of her, like he'd been starving, and she was the first real meal he'd had in years. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Sandra's professional composure had completely shattered. She looked up at him with wide eyes, shocked by the intensity of her own response. "That was a mistake," she breathed.
"No."
His forehead rested against hers. "That was inevitable. And now that I've had you in my arms properly, I'm never letting you go." The possessive declaration should have sent her running. Instead, it sent heat pooling low in her belly. "You're very presumptuous." "I'm very certain." He pressed a kiss to her temple, her cheek, the corner of her mouth. "Have dinner with me tomorrow. Let me show you I'm not just intensity and gifts. Let me show you who I am when I'm with you." Sandra knew she should say no, knew she was playing with fire. But when she looked into his eyes and saw vulnerability beneath the commanding exterior, she found herself nodding. "Okay, one dinner." The smile that transformed his face was devastating. One dinner, he agreed, though they both knew it was a lie. One dinner would never be enough. True to his word, Min-ho picked her up the following evening in a sleek black car that probably cost more than most people's houses. He traded his usual severe suit for dark jeans and a simple button-down that somehow made him look even more dangerous. "Where are we going?" Sandra asked as they pulled away from her apartment building. "Somewhere we can talk without interruption." His hand found hers on the seat between them, fingers intertwining with easy confidence. "Somewhere I can focus on you instead of pretending to care about wine pairings and ambient lighting." They drove out of the city center, climbing into the hills until Seoul spread below them like a blanket of stars. Min-ho parked at an overlook where a small table had been set up, complete with candles and covered dishes that smelled incredible. "You did all this?" Sandra asked, genuinely touched. "I had help," he admitted. "But I chose everything myself. No assistance, no staff recommendations.
Just what I thought you might like."
The meal was perfect. Not fancy French cuisine or pretentious molecular gastronomy, but comfort food elevated to art. They talked for hours, conversation flowing easily once the initial tension dissolved. Min-ho told her about growing up in Seoul, about taking over his father's business empire at 22, about the loneliness that came with power. Sandra shared her own story. Growing up in Atlanta, her parents' divorce, her decision to chase her dreams of working in international art across the ocean. She told him about the challenges of being a Black woman in Korea, the constant navigation between appreciation and appropriation, belonging and otherness. Min-ho listened with complete attention, asking questions that showed he genuinely cared about understanding her experience. When she mentioned an incident where a gallery patron had touched her hair without permission, his expression darkened with barely controlled rage. "Did they apologize?" Eventually, Sandra said carefully, watching his face. "But it's not uncommon. Some people think my body is public property." His jaw clenched. "If anyone touches you without permission again, I want to know about it." The protective fury in his voice sent warmth spreading through her chest. "Why do you care so much? We barely know each other." Min-ho reached across the table and took her hand. "Because from the moment you kissed me, something shifted in my universe. I know how that sounds. I know it's too fast, too intense. But I've spent my entire adult life making calculated decisions, building walls, keeping everyone at arm's length. And then you walked into that bar and destroyed 15 years of careful control in 30 seconds. Sandra's throat tightened. "I'm not special. I'm just me. You're extraordinary." He stood and pulled her up with him, drawing her into his arms. "And I'm going to spend as long as it takes proving that to you." When he kissed her again, slower this time, thorough and deliberate, Sandra let herself sink into it. Let herself believe, just for a moment, that this could be real. That a man like Kang Min-ho could want someone like her for reasons that had nothing to do with novelty or conquest. They stayed on that hill until the candles burned low, wrapped in each other's arms, talking and kissing and learning the contours of this unexpected connection. When Min-ho finally drove her home, he walked her to her door like a gentleman despite the heat still simmering between them. "Can I see you again?" he asked, tucking a curl behind her ear. Sandra smiled. "I think that's inevitable." His answering grin was pure satisfaction.
"Good.
Because I'm not letting you go now." The next few weeks passed in a blur of stolen moments and growing intensity. Min-ho pursued her with single-minded focus, showing up at the gallery with lunch, calling her between meetings just to hear her voice, finding excuses to be near her whenever possible. Sandra tried to maintain some semblance of normalcy, but it was impossible when every day brought new evidence of his devotion. He learned her coffee order, her favorite authors, the little things that made her smile. He listened when she talked about her work, asked intelligent questions, treated her passions with respect instead of condescension. But there were moments when she glimpsed the other side of him, the dangerous man beneath the attentive lover. Like when a colleague at the gallery made an inappropriate comment about her appearance, and Min-ho's expression went so cold that the man literally stumbled backward in fear. Or when they attended a charity gala together and another man asked Sandra to dance. Min-ho had smiled politely and declined on her behalf, but his hand on her waist had tightened possessively, and she'd felt the tension radiating through his body for the rest of the evening. "You can't control who talks to me," she told him in the car afterward. "I know." His voice had been strained. I'm trying to be reasonable. But when I see other men looking at you, wanting you, something primal takes over. I want to make it clear that you're mine." The possessive declaration should have irritated her. Instead, it sent illicit heat curling through her veins. "I'm not property, Min-ho." "No, you're infinitely more valuable than property." He pulled the car over and turned to face her fully. "You're the only thing in my life I didn't plan for, didn't strategize, didn't calculate. You're chaos and beauty, and everything I never knew I needed. So forgive me if I'm not good at sharing." They'd ended up kissing in the car like teenagers, unable to keep their hands off each other. But Sandra had pulled back before things went too far, needing to maintain some control over the situation. Min-ho had respected her boundaries, though she could see the effort it cost him. 1 month after their first official date, Sandra's best friend Keisha cornered her at their usual coffee shop. "Okay, I've been patient, but we need to talk about your scary boyfriend." "He's not scary," Sandra protested weakly. "Girl, he's terrifying." Keisha leaned forward. "Do you even know what he does for a living? Like, really does? He runs his family's business empire. Import-export, real estate, investments. That's the sanitized version." Keisha pulled out her phone and showed Sandra a news article. The headline read, "Allegations of organized crime links to Kang Corporation dismissed due to lack of evidence." Sandra's stomach dropped. "What is this?" "Research I should have done a month ago," Keisha said seriously. "Sandra, there are rumors. Nothing proven, nothing concrete enough for prosecution, but whispers about his family's connections to organized crime. Money laundering, protection rackets, the kind of business that doesn't show up in annual reports." Sandra stared at the article, her mind racing. She thought about Min-ho's intensity, the way people seemed afraid of him, the automatic deference he received wherever they went. She'd assumed it was wealth and power. But what if it was something darker? "I don't believe it," she said finally. "I know him, Keisha. He's not a criminal." Her friend's expression softened. "Maybe not. Maybe it's all rumors and coincidence. But Sandra, please be careful. Men like that, they're dangerous even when they love you. Especially when they love you." That night, Sandra couldn't sleep. She kept replaying conversations with Min-ho, looking for signs she'd missed, clues that might confirm or deny Keisha's concerns. But all she could remember was his gentleness with her, his patience, the way he'd opened up about his loneliness and pain. The next evening, she decided to confront him directly. Min-ho picked her up for dinner as planned, but instead of heading to the restaurant, Sandra asked him to take her somewhere private. They ended up at his penthouse, a stunning space of modern luxury overlooking the Han River. "What's wrong?" he asked immediately, reading her tension. "Talk to me." Sandra took a deep breath. "A friend showed me some articles about your family's business, about allegations of organized crime." Min-ho's expression went carefully blank. "I see. Is it true?" She forced herself to hold his gaze. "Are you involved in illegal activities?" For a long moment, he didn't answer. Then he walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows and stared out at the city. "My father built his empire on both legitimate business and less savory connections. When I took over, I spent 5 years disentangling us from the criminal elements. It wasn't easy and it wasn't clean, but I did it." He turned to face her. "I'm not a saint, Sandra. I've made decisions that would horrify you. I've protected my family's interests using methods that aren't always legal. But I've never hurt innocent people. I've never trafficked in drugs or human misery. And everything illegal ended years before I met you." Sandra's hands trembled. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" "Because I'm a coward." His voice turned raw. "Because I knew if you learned the truth too soon, you'd run, and I can't let you run. I need you too much." The admission hung between them. Sandra knew she should be angry, should feel betrayed by the omission. But looking at his face, seeing the vulnerability beneath his controlled exterior, she couldn't summon righteous fury. Just compassion and understanding, and the terrible recognition that she was already too far gone to walk away. "I need time to think," she said finally. Min-ho nodded, his expression accepting even as pain flashed in his eyes. "Take all the time you need. I'll wait." Sandra left his penthouse with her head spinning. She spent the next 3 days avoiding his calls, trying to process everything she'd learned. Keisha urged her to end things cleanly, to protect herself from potential fallout. But Sandra couldn't stop thinking about the way Min-ho had looked at her when he confessed his past. The shame and hope warring in his expression. The way his hands had clenched at his sides, as if he were physically restraining himself from reaching for her. On the 4th day, she showed up at his office unannounced. Min-ho's assistant tried to stop her, but Sandra walked past the protests and pushed open his door. Min-ho looked up from his desk, surprise and cautious hope flickering across his face. "I've been thinking," Sandra said without preamble. "And I realized something. Everyone has a past. Everyone has things they're not proud of. What matters is who you choose to be now." She crossed the room and stopped in front of his desk. "You've shown me nothing but respect and care. You've been patient and honest, even when the truth made you vulnerable. So yes, your past scares me. But losing you scares me more." Min-ho stood slowly, as if afraid sudden movement might shatter the moment. "You mean that?" "I mean it." She reached for his hand. "I'm choosing to trust you. Don't make me regret it." He pulled her into his arms with such force that her feet left the ground. "I swear to you," he breathed against her hair, "I will spend every day proving I'm worthy of that trust. You'll never regret choosing me." When he kissed her, it felt like a promise.
Like a vow.
Like the ceiling of something that had been building between them since that first night in the bar. That evening, Min-ho took Sandra to his favorite restaurant, a small place tucked away in Itaewon that served the best Korean barbecue in the city. They talked for hours, the tension of the past few days dissolving into easy intimacy. But halfway through dinner, a man approached their table. He was middle-aged, expensive suit, with the kind of arrogant bearing that came from too much money and not enough consequences. Min-ho's entire demeanor changed, his expression going cold and dangerous. "Kang," the man said with false friendliness. "I heard you were back in town. Thought I'd say hello."
Park.
Min-ho's voice could have frozen water. "What do you want?" "Just being neighborly." The man's gaze slid to Sandra with obvious appreciation. "And who is this lovely creature? You always did have excellent taste." Sandra felt Min-ho tense beside her. "This is Sandra, my girlfriend. And we're having a private dinner, so, if you'll excuse us." Of course, of course." Park held up his hands in mock surrender. "But before I go, I should mention that I'll be at the Hwang auction next week. I heard there's a particular piece you've had your eye on. Should be interesting to see who wants it more." The threat beneath the polite words was obvious. Min-ho stood slowly, and Sandra watched his carefully controlled expression shift into something that made her heart race with fear. "If you bid against me on that piece, you'll regret it. Competition keeps things interesting, don't you think?" Park smiled. "See you next week, Kang." "Lovely meeting you, Sandra." After he left, Min-ho remained standing, his hands clenched into fists. Sandra reached up and touched his arm. "Min-ho, who is that?" "Someone from my past." He sat down heavily. "Someone who's testing me to see if I've gone soft."
Have you?
His eyes met hers, dark and intense.
Yes.
"Because before you, I would have handled that threat with violence. But now I have something to lose, and that changes everything." The admission sent conflicting emotions through her. Fear at the casual mention of violence. Warmth at being something he considered precious enough to change for. She laced her fingers through his, offering silent support. The rest of dinner passed without incident, but Sandra could feel the tension radiating from Min-ho. When they returned to his penthouse, he poured himself a whiskey and stood at the windows, staring out at the city with an expression she couldn't read. "Talk to me," Sandra said softly, approaching from behind. "What's really going on?" Min-ho set down his glass and turned to face her. "Park Sung-jae was my father's business partner. When I took over and started cleaning up the organization, I cut ties with him. He's been trying to undermine me ever since, looking for weaknesses to exploit. And he thinks I'm your weakness." "You are." Min-ho's hands framed her face with devastating gentleness. "You're the only thing in my life that could be used against me. And that terrifies me because I know what men like Park are capable of." Sandra's heart clenched at the fear in his voice. Then maybe we should slow down. Put some distance between us until this blows over.
No.
The word came out sharp and final. I won't let him dictate my life. I won't let anyone take you from me. He kissed her with an intensity that stole her breath, all control finally snapping. Sandra responded with equal desperation, tired of restraint, tired of careful boundaries. They stumbled toward his bedroom, shedding clothes along the way, hands exploring with urgent need. What followed was passionate and overwhelming, but when the heat faded and reality returned, Sandra lay in Min-ho's arms feeling exposed and vulnerable in ways that had nothing to do with physical nakedness. Min-ho's fingers traced patterns on her shoulder, his touch reverent. Stay tonight.
Sandra wanted to.
Wanted to wake up in his arms and pretend the outside world didn't exist. But fear crept in, whispering that she'd given too much too fast, that this intensity couldn't possibly last. I should go home, she said quietly. His arms tightened.
Why?
Because this is moving too fast. Because I'm scared. Because when you get tired of me, I want to make sure I can put myself back together. Min-ho sat up, pulling her with him so they faced each other in the dim light. Listen to me very carefully. I'm not going to get tired of you. What we just shared wasn't casual or temporary. I don't do casual, Sandra. I don't do temporary. When I commit to something, I commit completely. His conviction should have reassured her. Instead, it made the fear worse. What if he meant it now but changed his mind later? What if his world proved too dangerous, too complicated for someone like her? I need to think, she said, pulling away. I need space to process this. Before Min-ho could respond, his phone rang. He answered with visible irritation, but his expression quickly shifted to alarm. When? Where? His voice turned deadly cold. I'm on my way. He hung up and immediately started dressing. I have to go. There's been an incident at one of my properties. What kind of incident? The kind that requires my immediate attention. He pulled on his shirt, all business now. Stay here. I'll have security posted outside. Don't leave until I get back. Sandra bristled at the command. You can't just order me around. Min-ho stopped and looked at her, and the intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. When it comes to your safety, yes, I can. Park knows about you now, which means you're a target. So please, just this once, listen to me. His genuine fear convinced her more than his authoritative tone.
Fine.
But call me when you can. He pressed a quick, hard kiss to her lips. I will. And Sandra? We're not done with this conversation. You're mine now, whether you're ready to accept that or not. He left before she could formulate a response. Sandra lay back against his pillows, surrounded by his scent, her body still humming from his touch, and wondered what she'd gotten herself into. She must have dozed off because she woke to the sound of breaking glass. Sandra sat up, heart pounding, listening intently. Voices drifted up from downstairs, harsh and threatening. She grabbed her phone, but before she could call for help, the bedroom door burst open. 3 men entered, moving with professional efficiency. Sandra screamed, but one of them clamped a hand over her mouth. Don't make this difficult, he said in accented English. Mr. Park just wants to have a conversation. They bound her hands and dragged her from the penthouse. Sandra fought, but they were too strong, too practiced. Within minutes, she was in the back of a van, blindfolded and terrified, speeding through Seoul toward an unknown destination. Meanwhile, Min-ho stood in the burned-out shell of one of his warehouses, listening to his head of security explain how the fire had been deliberately set. His phone had already rung twice with Sandra's number, but he'd been too focused on damage control to answer immediately. When he finally checked and saw 3 missed calls in rapid succession, ice flooded his veins. He dialed her back. No answer. He tried again. Nothing. He called his building's security. Mr. Kang, they said nervously, we have a situation. 3 men entered your penthouse approximately 20 minutes ago. They left with a woman matching your companion's description. Min-ho's world narrowed to a single point of absolute fury. Get me every camera angle, every piece of footage, and call Taejin. Tell him to mobilize everyone.
Now.
He hung up and immediately dialed Park Sung-jae. The older man answered on the third ring, his voice smug.
Kang.
I was wondering when you'd call. Where is she? Min-ho's voice was deadly calm, the kind of quiet that preceded violence. Somewhere safe. For now. Park's tone turned serious. We need to talk, you and I, about the way you've been disrespecting our old partnership, about how you need to remember where you came from. If you hurt her, there's nowhere on this earth you can hide from me.
Such passion.
Park chuckled. She must be something special. Don't worry, I'm not going to hurt her.
Yet.
But you're going to do exactly what I say, or things will get very unpleasant for your beautiful girlfriend. Min-ho's hands clenched so hard his knuckles cracked. What do you want? The Huang property. The auction next week. You're going to let me win it without competition. And you're going to publicly apologize for cutting me out of your organization. Do that and I'll return Sandra unharmed. And if I refuse, then I'll send her back to you in pieces. Park's voice turned cold. You have 24 hours to decide. Choose wisely, Kang. The line went dead. Min-ho stood frozen for 3 seconds, his mind calculating angles, resources, potential outcomes. Then he moved, barking orders into his phone as he strode toward his car. Taejin, I need locations on all of Park's properties. Personal residences, business fronts, everything. I want surveillance on each one within the hour. Boss, that's 15 locations across Seoul. Taejin's voice carried doubt. We don't have the manpower to cover them all simultaneously. Then hire more people. Min-ho's voice cut like a blade. Rob every resource from every operation we have. I don't care what it costs. Find her. He drove back to his penthouse, his mind racing through scenarios. Park was old school, believed in dramatic gestures. He wouldn't keep Sandra at an obvious location. But he also wouldn't be able to resist showing off, proving he still had power. At the penthouse, Min-ho reviewed security footage with cold precision. The 3 men had moved with military efficiency, professionals who knew exactly how to avoid cameras and minimize evidence. But they'd made one mistake. A partial license plate visible for 2 frames as they loaded Sandra into the van. It took Taejin 40 minutes to trace the vehicle to a shell company registered to one of Park's known associates. The registered address led to a warehouse district in the industrial outskirts of Seoul. Min-ho mobilized his entire security team, 20 men armed and ready to move on his command. Before they left, Taejin pulled him aside. Boss, if we go in heavy like this, there will be consequences. Police attention, media scrutiny. Everything you've worked to legitimize will be questioned. Min-ho's expression remained ice-cold. I don't care about legitimacy. I don't care about consequences. The only thing that matters is getting her back alive. Everything else can burn. They drove in a convoy of black vehicles, pulling up to the warehouse just after midnight. Min-ho's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. A photo of Sandra bound to a chair, eyes wide with fear but unharmed. The message read, TikTok Kang. Time is running out. Min-ho forwarded the image to his tech specialist. Trace this. I need to know if she's actually in this building or if Park is playing games. Inside the warehouse, Sandra fought against the zip ties binding her wrists. Her captors had removed her blindfold an hour ago, apparently confident she couldn't escape or identify them later. 3 men guarded her, bored and professional, treating her kidnapping like a routine business transaction. She'd tried reasoning with them, pleading, even threatening. Nothing worked. They simply ignored her, occasionally checking their phones and speaking in rapid Korean she couldn't follow. Fear sat heavy in her chest, but beneath it burned anger. Anger at Park for using her as a pawn. Anger at herself for not listening when Min-ho warned her to stay put. But mostly anger at the situation that had put them here. She'd known getting involved with Min-ho meant entering a dangerous world, but knowing abstractly and living a reality were entirely different experiences. One of the guard's phones rang. He answered, listened, then looked at Sandra with new interest. He crossed to her and yanked her to her feet. Time to make a video call. Smile pretty for your boyfriend. Before she could respond, another phone buzzed. Then another. All three guards checked their devices simultaneously, their expressions shifting from bored to alarmed. One of them barked orders in Korean, and suddenly they were moving, weapons drawn, positioning themselves defensively. Sandra's heart leaped. Min-ho had found her. The warehouse doors exploded inward with the percussion of breaching charges. Smoke flooded the space, and through it came Min-ho's security team, moving with tactical precision. Gunfire erupted, sharp cracks echoing off concrete walls. Sandra dropped to the ground, making herself as small as possible while chaos raged around her. Through the smoke and noise, she glimpsed Min-ho. He moved like violence incarnate, his usual controlled demeanor replaced by pure lethal focus. He took down one of her guards with brutal efficiency, then immediately swung toward the second. The third tried to use Sandra as a shield, dragging her up by her hair. Min-ho froze, his weapon trained on the guard. His voice cut through the din with absolute authority. "Let her go, and I'll let you live. Keep holding her, and I'll kill you slowly." The guard's hand trembled against Sandra's throat.
Park will destroy you for this.
Park is already dead. Min-ho's tone held no emotion. He just doesn't know it yet. Last chance. Release her. The guard made his choice, shoving Sandra forward as he raised his weapon toward Min-ho. But Tae-jin was faster, his shot precise and final. The guard crumpled, and Sandra stumbled into Min-ho's arms. He caught her, crushing her against his chest with such force, she could barely breathe. His hands roamed over her frantically, checking for injuries. "Are you hurt? Did they touch you? Tell me everything." "I'm okay." Sandra's voice shook despite her best efforts. "Scared but okay." "Min-ho, I'm sorry. I should have listened when you told me to stay." His laugh was half sob, his forehead pressing against hers. "Don't apologize. This is my fault. My world, my enemies. I should have protected you better." Around them, Min-ho's team secured the warehouse. Tae-jin approached, his expression grim. "Boss, Park wasn't here. But we found evidence he's been using this location for weeks. Financial records, shipping manifests, everything we need to bury him legally." "I don't want him buried legally." Min-ho's voice turned to ice. "I want him buried permanently. If you kill him, the consequences." "I said I want him buried." Min-ho cut him off. "But you're right about method. Legal destruction will hurt him more than a bullet. Take everything. I want his empire dismantled brick by brick. I want him to watch everything he built crumble before I put him in the ground." Tae-jin nodded and moved to coordinate the evidence collection. Min-ho turned his full attention back to Sandra, his hands cupping her face with devastating gentleness that contrasted sharply with the violence of moments before. "I'm taking you somewhere safe," he said. "Somewhere Park can't reach. Somewhere I can keep you protected while I handle this." Sandra shook her head. "I'm not hiding. I'm not running. If staying with you means facing danger, then I face it. But I face it with you, not locked away somewhere while you fight alone." His eyes searched hers, looking for certainty. "You understand what you're choosing? Once Park knows I'm coming for him, things will get worse before they get better. He'll try to hurt me through you again. Then we make sure he doesn't get another chance." Sandra's voice grew stronger. "You told me once that I made you feel human. Well, you make me feel brave. Brave enough to stand beside you instead of behind you." Something shifted in Min-ho's expression, vulnerability mixing with fierce pride. "You're extraordinary," he breathed. "Absolutely extraordinary." He kissed her there in the warehouse, surrounded by the aftermath of violence, and Sandra understood with perfect clarity that she'd crossed a line tonight. There was no going back to her simple life, no pretending she could exist separately from Min-ho's world. They were bound together now for better or worse. The drive back to the city was tense and silent. Min-ho kept Sandra pressed against his side, his arm wrapped protectively around her shoulders. She could feel the tremors running through his body, the barely controlled fury still simmering beneath his surface calm. At his penthouse, he personally swept every room before allowing her inside. Then he pulled her into the bathroom, stripping off her torn clothes with shaking hands and helping her into the shower. He didn't try to join her, just stood guard outside the glass, watching to make sure she was real and safe. After, Wrapped in his robe and sitting on his bed, Sandra watched him pace. His control was fracturing, the weight of what had almost happened finally hitting him. I should have killed them all, he said, more to himself than her. Should have made them suffer for putting their hands on you. Min-ho, stop. Sandra stood and caught his hands, forcing him to face her. I'm okay. You got to me in time. This time. His voice cracked. But what about next time? What if I'm not fast enough? What if? There won't be a next time, she interrupted. Because you're going to end this with Park. You're going to show him exactly why people fear you. And I'm going to be right here when you do. Her confidence seemed to steady him. He pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. I love you, he said, the words muffled but clear. I know it's too soon. I know it's insane. But I love you, Sandra, and I can't lose you. The confession should have terrified her. Instead, it settled something deep in her chest. I love you too, she whispered back. Even though you're intense and possessive and come with more baggage than an airport carousel. His laugh was wet with emotion. Marry me. Sandra pulled back to look at his face, certain she'd misheard. What? Marry me. Min-ho's hands framed her face. Not eventually. Not someday.
Now. Tomorrow.
As soon as it can be arranged. Because I almost lost you tonight, and I'm not wasting another second pretending I can live without you. Min-ho, we've only been together a few months. I don't care. His thumbs stroked her cheeks. I've spent my entire life making careful, calculated decisions. Building empires through strategy and patience. But with you, I don't want to be patient. I want forever. And I want it to start now. Sandra's heart hammered against her ribs. This was crazy. They barely knew each other. The rational part of her brain screamed to slow down, to think this through. But the part of her that had kissed him on a dare, that had chosen to trust him despite his dangerous past, that had fallen for him despite every logical reason not to, that part whispered yes. Okay, she heard herself say. Yes, I'll marry you. The joy that transformed his face was worth every risk. Min-ho kissed her with such tenderness that tears spilled down her cheeks. When he pulled back, his expression had shifted to pure determination. Tomorrow morning, we go to the courthouse. No elaborate ceremony, no waiting. Just you and me making it legal. He paused. Unless you want something traditional, I'll give you whatever wedding you want, Sandra.
Just tell me.
Courthouse is perfect, she said honestly. Because this isn't about the spectacle. It's about us choosing each other. They spent the rest of the night wrapped around each other, talking and planning and occasionally kissing with desperate relief that they'd both survived the evening. As dawn broke over Seoul, Sandra watched Min-ho sleep and wondered how her life had changed so completely in such a short time. 6 months ago, she'd been a simple art curator, navigating the challenges of living in a foreign country, but fundamentally safe. Now she was lying beside a man with a dangerous past, preparing to marry him within hours, and somehow none of it felt wrong. It felt inevitable. Min-ho's eyes opened, immediately finding hers. Morning, he said, his voice rough with sleep. Still planning to marry me? Or did you change your mind in the last 3 hours? Still planning, Sandra confirmed. Though I reserve the right to have a small breakdown about it later. Fair enough. He pulled her closer. I should probably warn you that being my wife comes with certain complications. Security details. Public scrutiny. People who will question why I chose you. The last part made Sandra tense. Because I'm black? Min-ho's expression hardened. Because they're narrow-minded idiots who don't deserve your attention. But yes, there will be racism. There will be people who assume you're a trophy or a phase. I can't protect you from all of it, but I can make sure anyone who disrespects you faces consequences. I don't need you to fight all my battles, Sandra said gently. I've been dealing with racism my entire life.
I can handle it.
I know you can. His fingers tangled in her curls. But you shouldn't have to. Not alone. They got up and dressed, Min-ho making calls to arrange the courthouse visit while Sandra texted Keisha with the news. Her friend's response was immediate and incredulous. Girl.
What? Call me right now.
Sandra promised to call later and focused on the surreal reality of preparing for her wedding. Min-ho had his assistant deliver a simple but elegant dress in her size, somehow knowing her exact measurements. When she emerged from the bedroom, his expression made her feel like the most beautiful woman alive. The courthouse ceremony was quick and efficient. Tae-jin and another security team member served as witnesses. The judge, who seemed to know Min-ho personally, expedited the paperwork with impressive speed. Within 30 minutes, Sandra was legally married to a man she'd known for less than 3 months. It should have felt rushed or wrong. Instead, when Min-ho slipped the ring on her finger and kissed her as his wife, Sandra felt a sense of rightness that defied logic. After the ceremony, Min-ho took her to a private brunch at an exclusive restaurant. Only then did he bring up the subject they'd been avoiding. Park is meeting with his lawyers this morning, he said, his tone casual, but his eyes sharp. By noon, he'll receive notice that I'm suing him for kidnapping and assault. By evening, I'll have leaked financial documents to 3 different news agencies showing his illegal activities. By tomorrow, his empire will be under investigation by every regulatory agency in Korea. You're destroying him publicly, Sandra observed. I'm destroying him systematically. Min-ho's smile held no warmth. He wanted to play games with my life, with your safety. Now he gets to learn why that was a mistake. What about the warehouse? The auction he wanted you to lose? Already handled. I bought the property this morning for triple its value.
Park won't see a cent.
As for the apology he demanded, he'll get one. A public statement about how I regret ever doing business with criminals. Let him choke on the irony. Sandra reached across the table and took his hand. You're terrifying when you want to be. Only when protecting what's mine. His expression softened. With you, I'm just a man who's stupidly in love with his wife. The word sent warmth through her. Wife. She was someone's wife. Min-ho's wife. It still felt surreal. They spent the rest of the day in a bubble, ignoring the world outside while they adjusted to being married. That evening, curled up on Min-ho's couch, Sandra finally called Keisha to explain everything. Her friend listened with increasing horror and disbelief. You married him, Keisha repeated. You married the scary Mafia-adjacent Korean man after being kidnapped by his enemies. Sandra, this is literally the plot of a crime thriller. I know how it sounds, Sandra said. But Keisha, I love him. And he loves me. And yes, it's fast and crazy, but when you know, you know. Her friend sighed heavily. Okay, I can hear it in your voice. You're really doing this. So I guess all I can say is congratulations, and please God be careful. I will. I promise. After hanging up, Sandra found Min-ho watching her with a soft expression. She doubts your judgment, he observed. She's my best friend.
She's supposed to worry. Sandra settled back against his chest.
Do your friends doubt your judgment? I don't have friends. I have associates and subordinates. His arms tightened around her. You're the first person in years I've let close enough to qualify as a friend, let alone a wife. That's sad. That was my life before you. Min-ho pressed a kiss to her temple. Everything was about strategy and control. No room for actual connection. But then you kissed me on a dare, and suddenly I remembered what it felt like to want something more than power. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the city lights blink to life as dusk fell over Seoul. Sandra felt the weight of the past 24 hours catching up with her, exhaustion pulling at her bones. Go to sleep, Min-ho murmured. I'll keep watch. You can't stay awake forever. I can tonight. His voice held absolute conviction. Tonight, I need to see you breathing. Need to know you're safe. Tomorrow, I'll rest. Sandra wanted to argue, but her eyes were already closing. She drifted off, cocooned in his arms, feeling safer than she had any right to feel given the circumstances. True to his word, Min-ho stayed awake through the night. He held his wife, this miracle who'd crashed into his life and changed everything, and made silent vows about the future. He would end Park's threat permanently. He would build a life where Sandra never had to fear again. He would be worthy of the trust she'd placed in him. By morning, news of Park's scandals had broken across every media platform. Financial fraud, Illegal business practices, connections to organized crime. Everything Min-ho had systematically leaked painted Park as exactly what he was, a criminal pretending at legitimacy. Park's lawyers called, threatening legal action. Min-ho laughed and told them to do their worst. He had evidence, witnesses, and the full weight of legitimacy on his side now. Park's empire crumbled faster than anyone anticipated, associates abandoning him like rats fleeing a sinking ship. Within a week, Park was under arrest. Within a month, he'd been convicted on multiple charges and sentenced to 15 years in prison. Min-ho attended the sentencing, Sandra at his side, and felt a chapter of his life close with satisfying finality. That night, lying in bed with his wife, Min-ho finally allowed himself to fully process everything that had happened. "I kept my promise," he said quietly. "Park can't hurt you anymore." Sandra turned in his arms to face him. "You did more than keep a promise. You showed me what it means to be protected without being controlled. To be cherished without being possessed. You are possessed, though." His smile held no apology. "Completely and irrevocably mine." "Just as you're mine," she countered. "Fair is fair." 6 months later, Sandra stood in the bathroom of their penthouse, staring at a positive pregnancy test with trembling hands. She and Min-ho had talked about children abstractly, someday in the future, when things were more settled. Apparently, someday had arrived earlier than planned. When she showed him the test that evening, Min-ho's reaction was pure joy. He swept her into his arms, laughing and kissing her with such happiness that her own fears melted away. "We're having a baby," he kept repeating, as if saying it made it more real. "Are you sure you're ready?" Sandra asked. "It's only been 6 months since we got married." "I've been ready since the moment I met you." Min-ho's hands settled protectively over her still flat stomach. "You, me, our child. This is everything I never knew I wanted." The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Min-ho became even more protective, hovering to the point where Sandra had to physically push him away sometimes just to have space to breathe. But she couldn't really complain because his devotion was absolute. He attended every doctor's appointment, read every pregnancy book, transformed one of the penthouse rooms into a nursery with meticulous care. Sandra continued working at the gallery until her 7th month, when Min-ho finally convinced her to take maternity leave. By then, she was too exhausted to argue. She spent her days preparing for their daughter. They'd learned the gender at 20 weeks, and Min-ho had cried openly in the ultrasound room. "We're having a girl," he'd whispered, staring at the screen with wonder. "A daughter who's going to be as beautiful and strong as her mother." Labor came 2 weeks early, hitting Sandra like a freight train at 3 in the morning. Min-ho went into crisis mode, timing contractions with military precision and getting her to the hospital with impressive speed considering his hands were shaking the entire drive. 12 hours later, their daughter entered the world screaming her displeasure at being disturbed. Min-ho cut the umbilical cord with tears streaming down his face, and when they placed the baby in Sandra's arms, she looked up at her husband with such love that he had to look away before he completely fell apart. They named her Maya Jina Kim. Maya for Sandra's grandmother, who'd encouraged her to chase her dreams across the ocean. Jina for Min-ho's mother, who'd passed away when he was young but who he still thought about every day. In the hospital room, watching Min-ho hold his daughter with such careful reverence, Sandra thought about the journey that had brought them here. A drunken dare in a bar. A kiss that changed everything. Danger and devotion, fear and love, all tangled together into something impossibly beautiful. Min-ho looked up and caught her watching. "What are you thinking about?" "How none of this should have worked," Sandra said honestly. "How we moved too fast, how your world was too dangerous, how every logical person told me to run. But I'm so glad I stayed." He shifted Maya carefully and leaned over to kiss his wife. "I spent 15 years building walls," he said quietly. 15 years convinced I was better off alone. Then you walked into that bar and destroyed every defense I had in 30 seconds. Best thing that ever happened to me. Even with all the drama and kidnapping and near-death experiences? Especially because of that." Min-ho's smile turned wicked. "You make life interesting, Mrs. Kim." Sandra laughed. the sound filling the hospital room with warmth. Maya stirred in her father's arms, making small noises that melted them both. They sat together as a family, watching their daughter discover the world, and Sandra knew that despite the unconventional beginning, despite all the chaos and danger, this was exactly where she was meant to be. Sometimes the best love stories started with a dare. Sometimes they involved danger and darkness. Sometimes they moved at impossible speed, defying every rule of sensible romance. But when they worked, when two people found each other across all the obstacles and chose to build something together, the result was magic. Sandra had kissed a stranger in a bar and ended up with a husband, a daughter, and a love story that would have seemed impossible 6 months ago. And she wouldn't change a single moment of it. Min-ho settled Maya back in her bassinet and climbed carefully into the hospital bed beside Sandra, pulling her against his chest. "Get some rest," he murmured. "I'll watch over both of you." "Always the protector," she teased sleepily. "Always," he agreed seriously. "For the rest of our lives, I'll protect you both. That's my promise." Sandra drifted off to the sound of his heartbeat, secure in the knowledge that Kang Min-ho always kept his promises. Their story had started with a dare, survived kidnapping and danger, and bloomed into something neither of them could have predicted. And as she fell asleep surrounded by her family, Sandra knew this was just the beginning of their forever. The christening happened 2 months later, a beautiful ceremony that blended Sandra's Christian background with Min-ho's Buddhist traditions. Keisha flew in from Atlanta to be Maya's godmother, finally meeting Min-ho in person and grudgingly admitting he was less terrifying than she'd imagined. Though still plenty intimidating, she'd whispered to Sandra during the reception, "Girl, the way that man looks at you. Like you hung the moon and stars just for him." "He's special," Sandra agreed, watching her husband hold their daughter with such careful devotion. "Even with all the complications, I wouldn't trade him for anything." 3 years later, Sandra stood in the gallery where she'd first reconnected with Min-ho after their bar encounter. The space had been transformed for a special exhibition celebrating Afrokorean cultural fusion. Sandra had curated it herself, using her platform to highlight artists who bridged their dual heritage with bold creativity. Min-ho arrived fashionably late to the opening, Maya perched on his shoulders and chattering excitedly about the paintings. He'd stepped fully away from any questionable business dealings, investing instead in legitimate enterprises and charitable foundations. The transformation wasn't easy, but he'd done it, motivated by the family he'd built and the future he wanted to secure for his daughter. "Mama, look," Maya called out, pointing to a vibrant canvas. "It's pretty like you." Sandra's heart melted as it did a dozen times a day. "Come here, baby girl. Let me tell you about the artist." As she explained the piece to her daughter, Min-ho watched with that same intense focus he'd had since the beginning. Sandra caught his eye and smiled, and he mouthed the words that had become their private mantra. "Best dare ever." She couldn't disagree. Sometimes the most reckless decisions led to the most beautiful destinations. Sometimes kissing a stranger in a bar led to kidnapping and danger and chaos. But sometimes, if you were incredibly lucky, it also led to love that transformed everything. Sandra had taken a dare fueled by tequila and ended up with a husband who'd burn the world down to keep her safe, a daughter who lit up their lives with joy, and a love story that got better with each passing day. Not bad for a simple kiss. That night, after Maya was asleep and the penthouse was quiet, Min-ho pulled Sandra onto the balcony overlooking the city. 5 years, he said, wrapping his arms around her from behind. 5 years since you kissed me in that bar. Best worst decision I ever made, Sandra joked. No regrets? She turned in his arms to face him. Not a single one. You? Min-ho's answer was a kiss, deep and thorough, and filled with the kind of devotion that had sustained them through every challenge. When he pulled back, his eyes held that familiar intensity that still made her pulse race. "Marry me again," he said. "We're already married, silly." "I know. But I want to do it properly this time. Big ceremony. All our friends and family, you in a dress that takes my breath away. Let me celebrate you the way you deserve." Sandra's throat tightened with emotion. "You don't have to prove anything to me. I chose you. I choose you every day.
I know.
His thumb brushed across her lips. But I want to show the world what you mean to me. Want everyone to see the woman who saved me from a life of cold isolation. So marry me again, Sandra Kim. Let me vow forever in front of everyone who matters. How could she refuse when he looked at her like that? Okay, she whispered. Let's do it. Let's get married again. The ceremony happened 6 months later, an elaborate affair that blended Korean and Nigerian traditions in a stunning display of cultural fusion. Sandra wore a custom gown that incorporated both traditional and modern elements, her natural hair styled in an intricate updo adorned with flowers. Min-ho wore a custom hanbok, looking so handsome that Sandra forgot to breathe when she first saw him. Maya served as flower girl, taking her duties with adorable seriousness. Keisha stood as maid of honor, Taejin as best man. Hundreds of guests filled the venue, witnesses to a love that had survived every test and emerged stronger. When Min-ho said his vows, his voice carried across the space with absolute certainty. 5 years ago, a beautiful stranger kissed me on a dare and changed my entire world. I didn't know then that I was meeting my wife, my partner, the mother of my child, the love of my life. But I know it now. And I promise to spend every remaining day proving I'm worthy of the gift you gave me when you chose to stay. Sandra's vows were equally heartfelt. You showed me what it means to be seen, to be valued, to be protected without being diminished. You've built the life with me that honors both our cultures, both our dreams. And you've given me a family I never thought I'd find. I love you, Kang Min-ho. Yesterday, today, and every tomorrow we're blessed to share. The reception was a joyful celebration, music and dancing and food from both their cultures creating a feast for all the senses. Min-ho never left Sandra's side, his hand constantly finding hers, his eyes following her with open adoration that made their guests smile. Late in the evening, they snuck away to a quiet corner. Maya was asleep in her grandmother's arms, the party continuing without them. Min-ho pulled Sandra close, swaying to music only they could hear. Thank you, he said quietly. For what? For taking that dare.
For kissing me.
For not running when you learned the truth about my past.
For choosing me anyway.
His voice turned rough with emotion. You saved me, Sandra. In every way a person can be saved. We saved each other, she corrected, pressing her palm against his cheek. You showed me I could be loved exactly as I am. No compromises, no diminishing. Just complete acceptance. They kissed under the stars, two people who'd found each other against all odds and built something extraordinary. And as they held each other, Sandra thought about the young woman who'd walked into a bar 6 years ago with no idea her life was about to change forever. That woman would never have believed this ending. Would never have imagined that a 30-second dare could lead to marriage, motherhood, and a love so deep it seemed to redefine the word itself. But life had a way of surprising you, of taking reckless moments and transforming them into destiny. Sandra had kissed the most ruthless man in the bar without knowing who he was or what he'd become to her. And in return, he'd given her the world. Not through wealth or power, but through unwavering devotion and a love that made every risk worth taking. Sometimes the best love stories started with danger. Sometimes they involved darkness and chaos. Sometimes they moved too fast for logic. But when they worked, when two souls recognized each other across all the obstacles, the result was pure magic. And Sandra Kim, formerly Sandra, who'd taken a dare in a Seoul bar, wouldn't change a single moment of their journey. Because every challenge, every danger, every impossible moment had led them here. To family. To forever. To a love that proved sometimes the most reckless decisions led to the most beautiful destinations. As Min-ho held his wife under the stars, their daughter sleeping peacefully nearby, he sent up a silent prayer of gratitude for that drunken dare. For the kiss that changed everything. For the woman who'd seen past his reputation to the man underneath. He'd spent 15 years building an empire, but his greatest achievement was the family he'd created with Sandra. And he'd spend the rest of his life making sure they knew exactly how much they meant to him. Some love stories started with flowers and poetry. Theirs started with tequila and a dare. But the ending was just as beautiful, just as real, just as forever. And really, Min-ho thought as he kissed his wife again, what more could anyone ask for? Thank you so much for joining us on Sandra and Min-ho's incredible journey from a reckless dare to a love that conquered every obstacle. If this story touched your heart, please hit that like button and subscribe to Afrokorean Central for more passionate tales of love that crosses cultures and defies expectations. Drop a comment telling us your favorite moment, and don't forget to share this with someone who believes in love at first kiss. Until next time, besties, remember that sometimes the craziest decisions lead to the most beautiful destinations. Stay blessed, and we'll see you in the next story.